Hello guys, this is Sunita. Welcome to your class. We are continuing our chapter reading, chapter 5, Mother's Day, Snapshot, class 11. So, up to here we have done it, and now let us continue. This little scene should be acted very carefully. We are to assume that the personalities change bodies. After the spell has been spoken, both women, still grasping hands, go legs as if though life were out of them. The bodies were looking lifeless. Then both come to life, but with the personalities of the other. Each must try to adopt the voice and mannerism of the other. So now Mrs. Pearson is bold means the body of Mrs. Pearson is bold because it has the personality of Mrs. Fizzlant and dominating. Now Mrs. Fizzlant, who has the personality of Mrs. Pearson, is nervous and fluttering. Mrs. Pearson. We are talking about the body of Mrs. Pearson, which has the personality of Mrs. Fizzlant. If you just remember when Mrs. Fizzlant started to speak those magic words, she had a cigarette in her mouth. But when the personalities changed, now the cigarette was in the body of Mrs. Fizzlant, and Mrs. Fizzlant's personality has changed the body. It is in Mrs. Pearson's body. Okay, see, this is Mrs. Fizzlant's body and this is Mrs. Pearson's body. So now the souls are exchanged. Okay, and now it has a cigarette in her mouth. Now the personality has come here and she is taking the cigarette from her mouth, and because this is real Mrs. Fizzlant, this is real Mrs. Pearson, but the bodies are different and the personalities are different. So see what I mean, dear. She notices the cigarette here. You don't want that. This is the Mrs. Fizzlant's personality with Mrs. Pearson's body. She snatches it and puts it in her own mouth, puffing contentedly. Mrs. Fizzlant, now with Mrs. Pearson's personality, means the real Mrs. Pearson, looks down at herself and sees that her body has changed and gives a scream of fright. And now she means it was just quite impossible for her to change the personality, but Mrs. Fizzlant was quite familiar with the process. And when जब Mrs. Pearson को ये फील हुआ कि मैं तो Mrs. Fizzlant की बॉडी में आ गई हूँ, then उन्होंने अपने आप को देखा और एक बार थोड़ी सी चीख मारी कि चिल्लाई वो Mrs. Fizzlant with Mrs. Pearson's personality. Oh, it's happened, Mrs. Pearson complaintly. Of course it has happened. Very neat. Didn't know I had it in me. Fizzlant, alarmed. She is quite alarmed, means काफी डरी हुई. But whatever shall I do, Mrs. Fizzlant? Mrs. Fizzlant, the body of Mrs. Fizzlant, but the real Mrs. Pearson is asking that Mrs. Fizzlant means the real Mrs. Fizzlant. What should I do now? George and the children can't see me like this. So Mrs. Pearson, who is actually with the soul of Mrs. Fizzlant, grimly. They aren't going to. That's the point. That they are not going to recognize you, that it's you. They'll have me to deal with. Only they won't know. And now it's not your work to deal with them. I will deal them. Okay, you just have some rest. Mrs. Fizzlant, still alarmed, means your Mrs. Fizzlant means the real Mrs. Pearson. She is alarmed, but what if we can't change back? It would be terrible. अगर मैं दोबारा change नहीं हो पाई, then it would be terrible. Mrs. Pearson means the real Mrs. Fizzlant. Here steady. Mrs. Pearson, if you had to live my life, it wouldn't be so bad. You'd have more fun as me than you have as you. ओके एंड मिसेस फिज़लन अब उसे थोड़ा सा कंसोल करने की कोशिश करती हैं कि दी मेरी लाइफ इतनी भी बुरी नहीं है, आप मेरी लाइफ जब जियोगे तो आपको मेरे से अपनी लाइफ से ज़्यादा मज़ा आने वाला है. मिसेस स्विट्जरलैंड. But I don't want to be anybody else, Mrs. Pearson. Now stop worrying. It's easier changing back. I can do it anytime we want. And anytime we want, Mrs. Switzerland means the real Pearson. Well, do it now. Mrs. Pearson, not likely. I've got to deal with your family first. That's the idea, isn't it? Actually, what was the idea? अब जो मिसेस पियर्सन है, रियल मिसेस पियर्सन जो स्विट्जरलैंड की बॉडी में है, वो डर गई हैं और वो ये पूछती हैं दैट अगर हम दोबारा चेंज नहीं हो पाए देन व्हाट विल हैपन. तो मिसेस रियल जो मिसेस स्विट्जरलैंड है, जो रियल में अब मिसेस पियर्सन की बॉडी में है, वो कहते हैं कि डोंट वरी, I know how to change it back. And idea क्या है? That let me deal with your family first and then we'll change the bodies, then we'll change the personalities. Didn't know how to begin with them. You said, well, I'll show you. You said na that you don't know how to deal with them, how to start to deal with them. You don't know, so I'll show you how to deal with them. Now, Mrs. Switzerland means real Mrs. Pearson. But what am I going to do? That अब मैं क्या करूँ? Then Mrs. Pearson, here Mrs. Pearson. Now just remember it, boys, students, that Mrs. Pearson means the body of Mrs. Pearson with the soul of Mrs. Switzerland. And Mrs. Switzerland means the body of Mrs. Switzerland, but the real soul is of Mrs. Pearson. So go into my house for a bit. There's nobody there. Okay. Then pop back and see how we are doing. You ought to enjoy it. Better get off now before one of them comes. And she just instructs her that you just go right now before one of them just come to the home. Mrs. Switzerland nervously. She is quite nervous. Rising, standing up. Yes, I suppose that's best. You are sure it will be all right? Are you sure that everything will be fine? Means there should be nothing worse than before. Mrs. Pearson, chuckling. It will be wonderful. Now off you go, dear. Mrs. Switzerland crosses and hurries out through the door right, left to herself. Mrs. Pearson smokes away, lighting another cigarette, and begins laying out the cards for patients on the table. Now, actually, this Mrs. Pearson, she was really Mrs. Switzerland and she behaves like Mrs. Switzerland, only she is playing cards and she is smoking, and real Mrs. Pearson has gone out. After a few moments, Doris Pearson comes bursting in left. She is a pretty girl in her early 20s who would be pleasant enough if she had not been spoiled. अगर वो नहीं बिगड़ी हुई नहीं होती तो वो बहुत अच्छी होती, काफ़ी बहुत sweet होती. So Doris, before she has taken anything in, Mom, you'll have to iron my yellow silk. I must wear it tonight. She now sees what is happening. Means वो अंदर आने से पहले ममा को ये इंस्ट्रक्शन देती है that ममा today you are to iron, means आपको मेरी येलो सिल्क को प्रेस करना है क्योंकि मुझे बाहर आज रात को बाहर जाना है. Okay, and after saying it, she notices what's going on in the house and is astounded, means quite surprised. What are you doing? She moves down left center and she moves towards her mother that, Mom, what are you doing? Mrs. Pearson now uses her ordinary voice, but her manner is not fluttering and apologetic but cool and incisive. Now, अब वो वैसे तो नॉर्मल वॉइस यूज़ करती है, मतलब गुस्सा करके नहीं बोलती हैं, बट हर वॉइस हैड अ डिफरेंट टच. मिसेस पियर्सन नॉट इवन लुकिंग अप, उसने उसकी तरफ देखा भी नहीं. व्हाट वुड यू थिंक आई एम डूइंग? तुम्हें क्या लगता है मैं क्या कर रही हूँ? वाइट वॉशिंग द सीलिंग, कि तुम्हें लगता है कि मैं वाइट वॉश कर रही हूँ छत को? डोरिस still astounded, still surprised. But you are smoking. But you, Mama, you are smoking. Mrs. Pearson, that's right, dear. No law against it. Is there? कोई कानून नहीं बना है कि हम स्मोक नहीं कर सकते हैं. क्या ऐसा कुछ है? Doris, but I thought you didn't smoke. Mrs. Pearson, then you thought wrong. Doris, are we having tea in the kitchen? Mrs. Pearson, have it where you like, dear. Now, she said, Mrs. Pearson said that जहाँ मर्जी वहाँ ले सकते हो तुम. Doris, angrily, do you mean it isn't ready? What do you want to say? आप ये कहना चाहते हो कि टी रेडी नहीं है? Mrs. Pearson, yours isn't. तुम्हारी तो नहीं है. I have had all I want. और मैंने अपनी बना के पी ली है. Might go out later and get a square meal at the Clarendon. और अब तुम यहाँ पे ले सकते हो या बाद में ले सकती हो. एंड तुम्हें तो बाहर वैसे भी खाना खाना ही है. Doris hardly believed her ears, and she asked, that who might? Okay, and Mrs. Pearson, I might. Who do you think? Doris, staring at, Mom, what's the matter with you? Don't be silly. Mrs. Pearson says, don't be silly, बेवकूफ मत बनो. Doris, indignantly, it's not me that's being silly, and I must say it's a bit much. When I've been working hard all day and you can't even bother to get me tea ready. Did you hear what I said about my yellow silk? Now, Doris, अब वो अपनी ममा के ऊपर थोड़ा सा रौब जमाती है, डोमिनेटिंग हो जाती है कि ममा आपको पता भी है मैं सारा दिन कितना काम करती हूँ, कितना हार्ड वर्क करती हूँ, और आप मेरे लिए चाय तक रेडी नहीं कर सकते हो. एंड क्या आपने सुना? दैट व्हाट डिड आई से अबाउट येलो सिल्क? मिसेस पियर्सन, नो, I don't like it now. I never did. Doris, indignantly, of course, I like it, and I'm going to wear it tonight, so I want it ironed. Now, जब उसने मिसेस पियर्सन से पूछा दैट हैव यू हर्ड अबाउट येलो सिल्क, तो मिसेस पियर्सन ने जवाब दिया कि नो आई डिडंट, एंड डोंट यू लाइक इट नाउ. और मुझे नहीं लगता कि तुम्हें भी पसंद होगा. मैंने तो कभी पसंद किया ही नहीं. डॉरिस सेड दैट ऑफ कोर्स आई लाइक इट. मैं तो पसंद करती हूँ और मुझे आज वही पहन के बाहर भी जाना है. मिसेस पियर्सन, वांट इट आयरन्ड? व्हाट वुड यू थिंक इट्स गोइंग टू डू? आयरन इटसेल्फ? तो तुम कहना चाहती हो कि तुम इसे प्रेस होना, तुम्हें उसे प्रेस की हुई हो जानी चाहिए. तो तुम्हें क्या लगता है दैट हु इज़ गोइंग टू प्रेस इट, हु इज़ गोइंग टू आयरन इट? आयरन खुद कर देगी क्या? डॉरिस, नो, यू आर गोइंग टू आयरन इट फॉर मी, यू ऑलवेज डू. एंड देन डॉरिस सेज that no, not the iron itself, you always do it for me, and now also you are going to do it. Mrs. Pearson, well, this time I don't. And don't talk rubbish to me about working hard. I've good idea how much do you do. Doris Pearson, I put in twice the hours you do and get no wages. Nor thanks for it. Why are you going to wear your yellow silk? Where are you going? Now, here Mrs. Pearson is just raising a question that, see, I know how hard work you are going to do. जितना तुम सारा दिन में करती हो उतना तो तुम्हें 2 घंटे में कर देती हो. And see, I don't even get the wages. I don't even get the thanks. So Doris, sulkily, okay, अब वो चिढ़ जाती है, and out with Charlie's pens. And Mrs. Pearson जब उससे पूछती है कि तुम्हें येलो सिल्क क्यों पहना, why are you going to wear yellow silk, where are you going? So Doris says, out with Charlie's pens. तो वो चिढ़ के कहती है कि मैं चार्लीज पेन्स के साथ बाहर जा रही हूँ. तो मिसेस पियर्सन, why? Doris, wildly, थोड़ा ब्रस्ट हो जाती है एंगर में. Why? What's the matter with you? Why shouldn't I go out with Charlie's pens if he asks me and I want to? Any objections? Go on. You might as well tell me. Okay. that if you have any objection, that why can't I you go? He asked me, I also want to go. Then why are you having objection? And go on, just tell me what is your objection. Mrs. Pearson, severely, can't you find anybody better? Wouldn't be seen dead with Charlie's pens, buck teeth, and half-witted. And here she throws her bullets over Charlie's pens and Doris कि तुम्हें नहीं लगता उसके टेढ़े मेढ़े तो दांत पड़े हैं, अकल उसमें है नहीं, ऐसे बंदे के साथ तुम्हें कोई और अच्छा बेहतर इंसान नहीं मिला? डॉरिस, ही इजंट, वो ऐसा नहीं है. Mrs. Pearson, when I was your age, I would have found somebody better than Charlie Spence or given myself up as a bad job. Okay, दैट जब मैं तुम्हारी उम्र की थी तो मुझे तो तुमसे बेहतर मिलते थे. दैट मैं तो चार्ली स्पेंस जैसे के साथ बिल्कुल बाहर जाना पसंद नहीं करती थी. रेस्ट इज़ योर चॉइस, यू नो. डॉरिस, नियरली इन टीयर्स, ओह शट अप. Doris runs out left. Mr. Pearson chuckles and begins putting the cards together. After a moment, Cyril Pearson enters left. He is the masculine counterpart of Doris, means he is the brother of Doris, Mr. Cyril Pearson.